Welcome everyone to today's event. We just heard from Arit Gott, who set up this next panel beautifully, giving us a lot to think about from the early days of the internet to today. I'm Kelly Kivlin. I'm a curator at DIA, and it's great to be in the company of our panelists, Howie Chen, Andrew Lampert, Cheryl Donegan, and Kristin Lucas. We are thrilled at DIA to be presenting this event in commemoration of the 25th anniversary of our Artist Web Project series. It's the longest running program of its kind in the United States in supporting new commissions for the internet or for internet-based work. To date, the series has realized 40 projects from a range of artists, all of which are accessible, well, nearly all, I should say, are accessible on our website. And you can look at that at any time, of course. Over the last several years, we've also been undergoing a huge restoration effort for our Flash-based work. Nearly half of our projects in the series were made with Flash and Adobe Flash. Most browsers have just ended their support of Flash. And we, of course, all knew about this in the tech realm and began a restoration effort a couple of years ago, looking into the best way in which to convert these projects to remain accessible for all of us. They have just completed that restoration, and those have been converted from Flash to HTML5. If you're curious about that effort, you're welcome to reach out to us. But we're really happy that nearly all of these Flash-based projects are fully functioning again, and two of which are Kristin Lucas and Cheryl Donegan's projects. Last month, we also launched the 40th Artist Web Project with Basel Abbas and Ruwan Abu Ram. The work is titled May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth. It's a co-commission with the Museum of Modern Art, and that is also now accessible on our website. It's part 1. Part 2 will be launching this summer. I want to, of course, thank Sarah Tucker, who is our Director of IT. She's been at DIA for many decades and with the Artist Web Project as producer from the beginning. She's a visionary, and we just are so lucky to have her continuing in this series. And she worked with both Cheryl and Kristin on their projects, and as they know, she's a force. I also want to thank all of my colleagues who helped today's program be realized. Andrea Avila, Theodora Lang, and Max Tanone, who's running the tech, as well as all the producers, or the programmers rather, we've been working with over the last several years on the conversion project. Today's event celebrates two of those, as I mentioned, both Donegan's studio visit from 1997 and Lucas's Between a Rock and a Hard Drive from 98. These were a part of our very early projects, as obviously you can see by their date. And they are so generous today in talking with Howie and Andrew on this work, as well as how these works have informed their practice since then. So I'm going to just read some short bios to introduce our panelists. Howie Chen is a curator and writer and founding director of Chen's, a townhouse gallery in Brooklyn. Previously, he has held curatorial roles at the Whitney Museum of Art and MoMA PS1, both in New York City, of course, and co-founded the curatorial project Dispatch. His writing has been published by Primary Information in Badlands Unlimited and in journals including Art Forum, Art in America, and Frieze. He is currently editing an anthology that collects the writings and ephemera of the Godzilla Asian American Arts Network, which will be published by Primary Information in fall of 2021. Cheryl Donegan received her bachelor's degree in painting at the Rhode Island School of Design and a master's degree in fine arts at Hunter College in New York City. Her work integrates the time-based terrestrial forms of performance and video with painting, drawing, and installation. Donegan's practice puts a subversive spin on issues relating to sex, gender, art making, and art history, and has been exhibited internationally, including the 1995 Whitney Biennial, and at the Museum of Modern Art, the New York Film and Video Festival, and the 1993 Venice Biennale, amongst many other places, even recently at De Cordova and other venues in the United States. Andrew Lampert is an artist, archivist, writer, and co-founder of the consulting firm Chen and Lampert. His work has been exhibited at, among others, the Whitney Museum of Modern Art, New York Video and Film Festival, the J. Paul Getty Museum, and the Toronto International Film Festival. He has edited books on Tony Conrad, Harry Smith, Manuel de Landa, and George Kuchar. He is an archivist and curator of collections at Anthology Film Archives, where he preserves hundreds of films and videos and co-programmed public screenings. His videos are also distributed by Electronic Arts Intermix, of which Dia is very close to. Kristin Lucas is a media artist whose work explores the impact of technology on humanity, blurring the boundary between the technological and corporeal. Her augmented reality, video installation, and net art and performance works have been presented internationally by museums and galleries, including the Whitney Museum of Art, New Museum of Contemporary Art, the Museum of Modern Art, FACT Liverpool, and the Nanju Paik Art Center in Korea. Lucas is an assistant professor in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Texas at Austin. So thank you all for being with us, and I will now welcome all of our panelists.
Hi everyone, I'm just waiting for everybody to appear. Hi everyone, thanks Kelly for the introduction. I also want to thank Dia, Kelly Kivlin, and her amazing team for this opportunity and conversation. I also want to thank Andrew Lampert for joining me today in this dialogue, and of course the artists Cheryl Donegan and Kristin Lucas. I also want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us on this cozy afternoon online. Both Andrew and I have known Cheryl and Kristin and their work for some time, and we are excited to reconnect and be in conversation about their artist web projects for this 25th anniversary celebration of the series. Today, we are hoping to bring a discussion from the perspective of the artist, the curator, and the archivist, among other ways of looking at these web art projects, which were commissioned over 20 years ago, which is astounding to think about. This afternoon, we'll be discussing how emergent media figures into each of the artist's overall practices, and everybody has such diverse multimedia practices, so it's going to be great to think about that together. And what these early web-based commissions for Cheryl and Kristin tell us about how artists creatively respond to technology and culture in its early formations. And also for us to think about how internet art and online experience has evolved overall. In assembling this panel and looking at the list of past web artist projects, I was also interested in questions of access, particularly who gets commissioned, who gets to be associated with media art practices, and how the media space and art in general have gender, racial, generational, and other dimensions to be explored. Before I hand it over to Andrew for further introductions, I must say that there is nothing more meta and true to the digital medium to be discussing internet art in a virtual venue using a Zoom platform to view a web page that is emulating an obsolete software invented in the 90s. I'm sure I missed a few other meta levels here too, but just to revel in the post-modernity of this moment. In this way, I think Cheryl's studio visit web project very much prefigures our online encounters with art today, especially during the pandemic. People are doing more studio visits online than ever. And also Kristin's work is prescient in mapping the psychic experience of online life as a series of waiting rooms and existential loading times. I'm thinking about that deep feeling of briefly seeing your reflection in a blank screen as Netflix loads up, or when an app asks if you're still watching and asking you if you're still there. So with that vibe, I want to hand it over to Andy, and we'll get started with things.
Thank you, Howie, and I echo all your thanks to everybody involved with making this happen today and everybody who's watching. I found something very interesting happening while I was exploring the works that we're going to talk about today in preparation for this conversation, in that I had a burst of something that otherwise really kind of never exists for me, which is nostalgia. I'm an archivist in a way by trade, but I don't kind of live a life where I live in the past and think it's a better time or long for it. Especially this year and the last, moments we've been in, relationship to time and the present has been very confusing. But knowing I can't go to the before again, I have been in the constant present. Going and looking at Kristin and Cheryl's piece evoked in me a nostalgia that comes with, I think, my age, but a nostalgia for my relationship to the computer and what it meant at that time to even have access to the internet. And, not to have, we live, plugged in instead of wireless. Wi-Fi was a completely different concept. And I think a lot about how now, 20 years later, the analogy to early cinema becomes so clear, and that cinema itself as a format doesn't really formalize till the teens. In the early era of cinema, the 1890s, the early 1900s, film formats, ways of projections, copyrights, trademarks, how film worked was a complete wildland, every company having its own method. But by 1914, things really became 35 millimeter with 4 perforations on each side of the image, and that became cinema. 20 years ago, on what we thought of as the internet, whether that was America Online or GeoCities or what have you, there were so many ways and directions that all of this could have gone. And one of the most amazing points made in Orit's presentation beforehand was how active artists were in defining the early stages of what the internet was. And so with that, I'm really curious to talk to and hear from 2 artists whose works are back, emulated today, and a reminder of a period that feels so long ago, but which has made such a lasting and pivotal, mark. So I think we should start with Cheryl. Cheryl, would you like to talk about your piece? Give us a little introduction.
Happy to. Wow, that a lot. I've took down so many notes prior to this, and so many of the things that were cited both by Andy and Howie really corresponds with what I've drawn up to talk about. And also just name checking Sarah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the early days when Sarah invited me to do this project, that Sarah herself did all the programming and all the HTML, and she was learning the same as I. It's funny because as much as so much newness was about the web and so much possibility for digital, I remember that time in the early mid-90s also as equally concerned with thoughts about and talk about death, the death of painting, the death of a more traditional solo studio type of a practice as opposed to site-specific or ephemeral projects done by multiple people. A lot of things were dying. A lot of things were being born at the same time. But I guess, nothing dies and nothing's born without leaving remnants and traces and scraps of its existence. And I feel like for me, that was the relevant place that I felt like I was inhabiting as an artist, someone who was sort of straddling births and deaths at the same time and trying to make use of both, like existing in this place of litter, this place of remnant. And when Sarah approached me to do the project, I kind of felt like that's what I wanted to bring to it, the sort of sense of being in a scattered field with fragments of a lot of different times scattered about that I was trying to build something out of and put together, but not really knowing quite how at all. So I guess as Kelly we is going to drive through, one of the first things that I noticed about the web is as soon as it came about, there was a move to hide it in a funny way. And the idea of a link became like, let's hide those links. So this mouse over I used a lot. So as she's exhibiting, I wanted the site to almost feel like a kind of a blindness that you had to kind of touch your way through. And so if you go, touching the different images. So you opens up to GIFs. So we did sort of simple things, hiding the mouse over so that the person would have to probe and almost like touch the screen. And of course, this is much before we had haptic screen in our hands of a smartphone. So when you see the little videos playing, little GIFs, boom, right to another image. And again, touching on the image, the 3 stripes, clicking, and then you see this other image with another little GIF of me, this time in a trash bag. So when, again, remnants or remainders were really on my mind. Even the remainder, that the artist is somehow a remainder. And clicking on that, more stripes. And this time, sort of observed geometries from the commercial world. These you might recognize as the Newport stripes from the cigarettes. So touching on those stripes, these images of fingerprints occur. Touch on the fingerprints, and you're back to another splash page. Again, with remnants of the film frame as kind of like clips that were fragments. Touch on the hands, go ahead. Another GIF plays. This time, again, right from the Newport cigarette campaign. The idea of a print or a stain. If you go back, how about the woman on her fours? Yeah, that's me. I pose for a lot of these like I did in my videos. So here's a little private performance. There's an image of a TV screen and prints that are made. If you click on that, you get this spooled out disaster of videotape. Click on the hand drawing, and you'll see another remnant, a little film fragment from an old Chantal Akerman film where the man sort of brings his hand up to touch the woman's butt and she slaps him away. But if you click on that, on the couple, you come back to the Newport woman putting another print, slapping the ass of the guy and making a hand print. So I was, and we click on them, we'll sort of go back to the splash page. Let's do okay, so stains and sort of stains coming through the fragment, sort of a corrosion I'm thinking about. And let's go to the studio visit. Yeah. Now this is another sort of feature of early web of like the webcam. And I'm specifically thinking like at the time there was controversy of people's privacies being invaded by like this idea of a webcam on them. So I set up a little sort of fake webcam in my studio. And as your clicking progresses, you'll see me working, doing dumb things, sweeping up, talking on the telephone, painting, engaging with the handwork of painting, and then different technologies, talking on the phone, etc. So there's and the image of it being sort of sitting on the floor eating lunch. So this kind of private world exposed. I was just sort of playing with a lot of these fragments and just sort of putting them together. The reason I called it studio visit is because I wanted. Well, every artist has this horrifying idea that someone will come into the studio and the main work you're working on is not interesting, but what's interesting is the fragments, the things around the corners, the things on the edges left behind or left over, the excess is the more interesting part. So that's how I was feeling about my own work. And if we go to the PDF slideshow now, I can kind of sort of talk through in my last couple minutes really quickly how these ideas of remainders were something that I was actively working at and trying to, lash into a program of painting. So here's my splash page. We can just go through it. I just wanted to put it up as we kind of click through the slides in a sort of rapid fashion. So more splash page images. So now starts, I just wanted to show some of these motifs that I was using. The Newport thing, this is from a video called Janus tapes. So you see I'm working with these images of like the kind of excess of like the foam finger of like, we're number one, this kind of excessive feelings of self, the Newport, marking the hand is, you can keep going on, the Newport colors, the Newport stripes, the image of the bottle from head with a sort of excess flow of, pleasures and flows of either whether it's paint or body fluid. I'm sort of interested in like dealing with these excesses. Even the bottle became kind of a costume. It had multiple identities of like, you know, a container, but also a camera, something things pass through and mark. You can keep going on. So the paintings that I was, Kiss My Royal Irish Ass, prints and stains as kind of excesses or remainders sort of fascinated me. So as we go on through the slides, you can keep going. I was working on this series of paintings at the exact same time that I was working on the website. And they were also like a collection of remainders, a collection of, you know, I'd repaint images from my old videos. Again, these kind of observed geometries that were sort of excesses of classical geometry of modernism, but that would show up in the quotidian landscape as signs of commercialism. So containers and framing, and this idea of like both capture and excess, like something that escapes or is left over, cast off, was something fascinating to me. As I said, sort of trotting this landscape of death of painting, and also the birth of new technologies like video that you know, with the Portapack, and that proceeded to the home video recorder, the web, like sort of all this newness, and then all this deadliness was kind of, where did I exist in the continuum? So you can keep going on with the slides. So on the left side of the screen, you're going to see the show I did that was called Scenes in Commercials. And the show is called A Retrospective Development, because it was sort of about, like, as I said, where was my place in all this technology? How did technology deal with, did technology kill painting, or was it going to extend it, etc.? The slide on the right is a slide from Kunsthal Zurich, where I did a show. And if we go on in the next slides, just kind of comparing the installations, this is sort of two installation, kind of tried to create like a fisheye view. Those paintings from '97, which were simultaneous to the website, were shown once in '97 and then never shown again. That show was considered a failure. It was met with a lot of confusion. It was literally almost like, you know, a career killer for me, because I wasn't, these questions, it was a show about questions more than answers. And I recently represented these works with new works. And if we go forward, we can kind of see, you know, I just wanted to display some of these motifs. I mean, that striped motif on the bottle, where it kind of came out again in these paintings that I call banners, which were digitally impressed images onto fabric that were produced through consumer technology. If we keep going, we can see more. This is a recent painting from like 2017, so literally almost 20 years later, of a digital image. I started to get into these tracksuits as, again, a kind of an excess of abstraction, a sense of that the geometries of the classical geometries of modernism were somehow found their excess, their remainder in sports clothes, like this tracksuit. That then I tried to sort of reincorporate it into an abstract space, similar to the banner on the other side. And we can keep going. Another different paintings from the last couple of years. Again, using printed digital technologies, and then craft techniques like dyeing and over-dyeing to try to create a very thin and compressed space, like the way I was doing in the website, trying to compress all these concerns, not really knowing how they would come together, but you know, somehow this idea of compressing them together felt necessary. So we can keep going. Again, like I've sort of, you know, always, as Howie said, like someone who worked with across technologies. So, you know, digital technologies have led to a lot of digital printing, digital on-demand printing that is accessible to consumers. So I've been using a lot of that to print clothing, print garments that also deal with images of garments. And these are two examples. We can keep going on. I've also been doing a lot of, as I say, like sort of following these implications of remainders and excesses into like the idea of like a silk scarf that's printed, but is almost like a remnant of a kind of a casting or a cast off of an idea of an abstract painting. So sort of reincorporated them into like upcycled clothing for performance. And it's kind of a legacy of my video work of performance, which I'm not doing as much now, but I see the legacy of it in work like this. So you can keep going forward. These just a performance, one of the last great nights out last February, we did a performance with these dancers costumed in these garments. We can keep going. More costumes I've been working on. Just that motif of the hand print of from the Newport and the foam finger. It keeps coming back in my work. In this case, as we can go on. These sort of skirts, here's me modeling them, but I did them for a dance company in Houston, where these two motifs come together of like this hand and this sort of degraded abstraction that occurs on something like a silk scarf. Oh, that was my timer for my 15 minutes. You can go, I just have a few more. Again, these are recent works, dyed and painted on digitally printed fabrics. But I just find, having to review this project for Dia, how literally it is tracked with my concerns and really was so helpful to me even achieving my concerns. To marry the digital and the painting to kind of figure out this sort of these sort of life and death stakes, as it were, being facetious, with the technology. But I guess I kind of really learned the truth of the motto that comes from Game of Thrones, that what is dead can never die. So I feel like if my website still lives, it's because it was never dead. So thanks, and I'll turn it over to the rest of you guys.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's a great tour and also a fly through up until the present. And we'll turn it over to Kristin to walk us through the original project and make the same linkages, and then we'll get to joining all of us together.
Well, perfect. Okay, so this is Between a Rock and a Hard Drive, and I'm just so thankful to the Dia team and Sarah for helping restore this. It was a really elaborate project, I realized when I revisited it and went back into it, because it's 56 waiting rooms for the internet, and I also requested that each one of these scenes also sort of break a rule. So navigation is kind of chaotic through it. So there's a lot of attention to detail, and it's been really fun going back and forth between the Flash and the HTML5 version and noticing just slight differences in writing. Sarah, who's writing the team that's working on rebuilding it. And right now, actually, we're still going to try to restore some of the audio files because Flash did such an amazing job of compressing sound. But this is what...
I have a large cat sitting on my monitor. Hey, you lost. Great name. What's the word? Hey, you lost. Great.
89, 89, 89, 89, and 8.
Let's see. So there are a number of different scenes, and then sometimes I change the rules, and you navigate to.
Out of court. Out of court.
So it's a difficult piece to talk over. And so there's 56 rooms, and sometimes there's one room, there's a piano, and you just hit all the keys and it plays this really obnoxious music. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we go to slides. I just wanted to show you also you can use the FAQ button. I wanted the project to be interactive and live feeling, ever-changing. That was the experience I had with the internet and what would happen on a web page, and so I wanted to try to do that. And so I took on the task of answering questions through a form. and you would submit a question and then I would respond to it. Eventually I had to work with guest writers because I just became too busy with it, but it was a really great space to play with a lot of things, and actually, which Cheryl, you talked about a bit too, is like beginnings and endings, and deaths and births, where I was thinking about analog to digital transition, and also virtual, physical and virtual, like living across multiple realities. So I'm going to, at that, move over to my slides, and I'll let you steer, Howie. All right, so I just wanted to give a little bit of context that this is actually my very first web project. I had been making work about the internet and about the hype and optimism of the internet. There was a lot of excitement around commerce and the future, and this was all happening before the dot-com boom. And outside of the internet, or I guess inside too, automation had been introduced to services, like everyday services. So I was experiencing more like voice menus, bank tellers, and things like that, that were supposed to be more efficient and productive, but were actually creating a lot of time for me to just be standing there doing nothing and waiting. And so I got an AOL account, and I had experienced the marketplace. My only computer at the time was an Amiga 2000 that was souped up that I ordered through AOL's marketplace, and then I spent a lot of time in chat rooms while I could actually still stay connected. I was interested in identity and trust in these spaces. I brought my own personal experience to this project, waiting for connections. And also feeling like a lot of communication I was having in chat rooms was just like really hard to follow and understand what anyone was talking about. So I made multiple waiting rooms, also sort of mirroring the chat room form. And they were all sort of hollow and empty and devoid of meaning and content, very distracting, somewhat confusing. I wanted the project to be game-like, familiar to, as sort of an everyday kind of thing. So I used like a Sony Mavica camera that recorded onto a floppy disk to take the pictures in the different scenes. I was interested in navigating, being a user through these changes and navigating systems and realities, how new technologies and the internet or software, browsers, things like that sort of affect our behavior. They shape language. How they also affect our body, like you get like a sore arm from using your mouse too much. So I was really interested in the connection between the body and technology. I wanted this to feel, let's go to the next slide. I wanted this to feel a bit unruly. So I wanted it to be sort of a misbehaving body of chat rooms. I asked Sarah, this is the first project I made that I didn't actually make entirely on my own. I asked Sarah to make this keyboard mutated. It had to be mutated and have all these disembodied sound files from the chat room and also speech bubbles overlapping the scenes. You can go to the next scene. This is the piano I was talking about. So they were all spaces of waiting, and I wanted it to be a cacophony of sound. I wanted you to be able to be in your workplace and misbehave and cause a ruckus. I was interested, as I said, in liveness, and so I created this field and this form that you could submit a question to and create the illusion of a 24-hour nonstop work environment, which I felt was introduced with the internet. The FAQ has a lot of miscommunication and kind of confusion between physical and digital, which is intentional. A lot of play in that. So the piece is very much about calibrating to a new way of being in the world and bringing the user into the experience. I became really interested in embodied experience. So I wanted this to be sort of immersive, where you would have your body situated here, just like any keyboard you're familiar with, and have a different kind of experience. There was a pushback against Flash in the art world at the time, and because of its strong aesthetics. And this, there was a lot of, like the web was being written in Flash suddenly. So I remember that conversation. And then 2 years later, Apple is using the silhouette aesthetic in its ads and stuff like that. So I really wanted to kind of have this corporate entity, but also be like really just a different kind of experience. Let's go to the next slide. And yeah, this is an example of the FAQ. Here's one question answer. Can we stay with you and Jay after the wedding? Love, Amy, Ellen, and Rod. We only have 8 megabytes of space left until May, but if you find this comfortable, we don't see why not. So yeah, just playing around. And next slide. This is something I was doing sort of around the same time. I was a VJ, actually, moonlighting on the Lower East Side, and I would do live performances where I had set lists, and I would embrace the error, and I would write these kind of poetic texts about being between like ideologies and media. I was... And nothing was seamless about it. It was like I was talking about like going online, jacking in, losing the body, that was kind of like projected as what the experience of cyberspace would be, but it was full of cables for me. And also I really had very little connectivity. I had to borrow a computer to work on the project with Sarah, and it was almost impossible for me to see many websites at the time I made the piece. Next slide. So this is another piece I had made the year before. This is really approaching technology and the internet based on the hype and optimism, but not actually having used the internet yet. And it's about the user perspective, the promise of the technology, the disappearance of the body, the bringing in of surveillance, trust and privacy issues, obsolescence of the body, and also of technological bodies. And this was also particularly around gender issues and the troublesome language between women's body parts and computer body parts like motherboards and daughterboards, as I started kind of getting more interested in taking things apart, taking the computer apart, looking at it. I used to do a lot of electronic stuff too. Next slide. This is, so Host was 1997, Between a Rock and a Hard Drive was 1998, and then this project, Refresh, was 10 years later, 2007. So at this time, the internet had bled fully into life. I had become over-identified with the function of the refresh button on a web browser. And this is also post 9/11. And I wanted to experience what it would be like to have everything like on a website where you click that button. Because of the slow speed, you would kind of have to wait for something to be reloaded. Everything would erase and then be refilled. And I wanted to know if I could have an experience, a new perspective out of that. I just kind of wanted to embody that feeling of a refresh and a reset. So I went to court and sorry, next slide. I forgot to move forward for that one. Yeah, so I went to court and I changed my name to my name, and then they used the stenographers there kind of making the changes or writing down, documenting everything. And so this was a piece in which I changed my name to my name as a method to sort of refresh myself, and I was able to succeed at that legally. Next slide. And this is a picture of me and the judge. There were actually 2 court hearings for this. He had to think about it for a while, and he eventually granted me this opportunity to refresh myself like a web page. And then next slide, and this is the official name change form. And then continue to the next slide. This is a lot of people asked me to read the refresh transcripts after that, and my work was I didn't want to do it myself, so I found a way to broaden the context. So I started working with my own social network and reaching out to people in their social networks. So it was kind of like an offline, online kind of gathering, and then I would bring people together who had very interesting backgrounds to read this transcript together in front of an audience, or bring people from an audience, someone who might have a relationship to the judge and being a person in a position of power, or someone who might have a name change or kind of same interesting, uncanny, same kind of something story. And I did this for years. Next slide. Exploring further with networks, because Between a Rock and a Hard Drive that's really the start of my career as an artist, and I was so informed by the internet. And so I kept following this path of like networks, new network technologies, and exploring their capabilities and their limitations, and also in a very much like the way I did in the FAQ, playing with like the language of what is virtual and what is physical and stuff like that. I invited people to participate in a yard sale that was augmented reality. So I advertised on Craigslist. You would come down to this place and you would be able to use a phone or my iPad that I had there. People came who didn't have anything, and you just stare into the sky and look at objects, and you could purchase them. And I would play around with things like, it was kind of a scam because I didn't know if like, we would get into conversations about this because I was taking money for these objects, and I was also taking your personal information. So those issues of trust were definitely a part of this, and kind of really having fun around it. GPS was inaccurate, so everything had a description, and sometimes the objects like related to some of the problems, like where I also ran a virtual cat adoption, and I would just be like, the cat's over in New Jersey right now. The very first one was on the High Line in New York, but it was a rogue kind of project. So collaboration and community, no guarantee that your iOS would be able to support your object that once you purchased it. There are a lot of different kinds of things that would prevent you from actually being able to enjoy your object. And 2 people contacted me and said, oh, I bought one, but there's 2 in my apartment. And I was like, that's because your neighbor bought one too. And there's like collision of like these objects in their space. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, and this is yet another one. This is a surveillance camera, and this was at Present Company for another yard sale event. And next slide. This is Soul Soaker, and again, exploring new technologies. This is not so much a networked piece, but there were a few things here that I felt were really important that connected back to between a rock and a hard drive. I wanted to bring the viewer into the work in an immersive way, and you can sit down and navigate a game controller. It's a roller coaster that is a pedestrian roller coaster, so it's all steps. And you can go to the next slide. It's a slow and arduous. It swaps out speed and high speed of a roller coaster for something slow, meditative, arduous. It swaps out the fear of heights and speed, like the thrill of all of that, for the fear of climate change. It is scaled to the size of the tallest roller coaster within the Unity program that I used. And it is also, the water rises according to sea level rise projections around climate change. So I was bringing real data together with this kind of fantasy world that you could enter. Let's see here. There's also no end, there's no levels, there's no end in state. There's a lot of Easter eggs, which was kind of similar to the keyboard where things would just change. It's empty and devoid of humans. Okay, next slide. And this is like fast forward to 2017. This is a social network participatory performance that I did where I worked with developers to create a shared reality between HoloLenses and iPads. And I also had a kind of fragrance station. So there were 3 different kinds of storytelling. But what I was really trying to do is build a project about, again, sea level rise, climate change impacts from the story of 20 flamingos that I sponsored in the wild that I would track on the internet. So the internet is really definitely tying into this, and there's a lot of other levels of streaming through servers and stuff to put this whole thing together. It was very much a sandbox-like thing, exploring ideas, prototyping. It was embodied experience, getting people involved, and also biological and technological, thinking about ecosystems. Let's move to the next slide. And I created this, and this one more image of it, and then this is that Engadget experience, Engadget alternate realities experience in LA. And the next slide, I was doing a residency at Pioneer Works. This is just another I did a whole bunch of different versions of work with these flamingos, and this is a way that you can kind of embody a flamingo and learn about flamingos and dancing together. And I'm not going to say too much about that one. I just wanted to kind of show you the expansiveness of the project. And the next slide is my app Flamingos, and it's this is augmented reality also, so you can go anywhere into the world and just start adding flamingos. It's very simple. That's all it's about, is just like adding flamingos everywhere, to the point that it's like probably not a good idea. And I wanted to direct that engagement with the user interface. So I'm thinking about the user and how do I tell stories with new technologies. And there was something about the presence and absence of the flamingo in the US. Like, we celebrate the flamingo and it's all over fashion, names of businesses. People make a lot of money off the flamingo, but they've been missing from Florida for over 100 years because we basically paved over nesting sites. And I mean, this is happening beyond Florida. It's basically more just that they used to come all the time, but we built everything. And there's just no space for flamingos, and now how they, like, the warming waters have changed how far they have to travel to get food and stuff like that. So they're coming back every once in a while, but the project was really about bringing awareness to, like, the plight of the flamingo. The next slide is a project I just did with the Whitney, speculative habitat for sponsored seabirds. And it brings together animations in P5.js. And I was super excited that the 3D web had evolved so far. And so this is a series for the Whitney, and it takes 30 seconds of play at sunrise and sunset. And other artists do this series too. And so for mine, I wanted to bring together all the seabirds that I was currently sponsoring, which were 20 flamingos and 1 penguin. And they had different, and then I brought them all into the same space where their habitats are colliding, which is becoming more of a reality. And this is a piece that was an intervention into a website. So it just loads no matter what you're doing. And I didn't want you to, I wanted to just take over everything on the screen. And the next slide. And I just put this in here. This is a commission I received from Onassis Foundation, supported by the curatorial team at New Ink. And this is a WebXR piece, which is 360. So you can load this on a phone and then rotate around. And it's also a P5.js animation. I made it during the pandemic in response to the fact that a lot of people are sitting at home eating, thinking about what to eat or how to eat. And meanwhile, all these species were out surviving and thriving because there were no people outside. And the sound of, in here, there are a lot of sound effects of me eating. So when the alligator closes its mouth, it's celery. It's me eating celery. And so I just wanted to show that because it's sort of like how far we have evolved, what can constitute network art since early days of internet art. And I'll close at that.
Thank you very much, Kristin. That was awesome. Can you bring the flamingos in here?
Right now?
Yeah, I wish. There should be Zoom flamingos for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You can do AR too in Zoom, so there could be some flamingos here.
That's incredible. I'm very having now heard both presentations, it strikes me that both of you created in this new frontier of the late 90s spaces, online spaces, virtual theaters or whatever you want to call them, but that are really anxious and have a lot of anxiety to them and actually seem to be kind of purposely chaotic in sense of sounds, you don't even realize you're controlling perhaps, or how to get away from them. But there's like a kind of tactile sense of the world, but that you can't know how to operate within it. There's a big learning curve.
Do you mean that you see the learning curve in our work?
Well, there's definitely a growth factor from out of those pieces that is you both made really clear. The sort of narrative, if you will, of like, how one thing led to another. But no, I think the learning curve of a 1997, 1998 internet user on how to use a site, how to use your site. I mean, your site's so specific and different from what one would have encountered in a chat room or AOL or normalized kind of controlled setting, and that you're trying to disrupt what's already becoming kind of formalized in terms of experience, but also that those spaces that you make, you'll feel quite anxious.
Absolutely. I mean, in that way, I was really happy to see the images of Kristin's piece Host, because that piece influenced me enormously because of exactly that aspect. Like I think one of the shots is like you go to an ATM and you're clicking on the touch screen of the ATM, which is not the internet, not connected, and you talking to it saying, well, what am I supposed to be doing here? And I'm waiting for something, as you were speaking of, this idea of like, what am I supposed to be doing here? What am I supposed to be waiting for? Am I doing this right? And, which is ironic because I just flash forward to today and hearing, some election official in Georgia saying, it's really hard to hack something with no modem, people. And I'm thinking, whoa, that just took me so far back, because it's like modems. And this idea of like, can you hack it? What am I supposed to be doing here? Can I trust this? Is this the right place? Like even this morning, I'm like, I'm in a shame spiral because I don't know how to use Zoom. So I think that kind of never leaves us.
I just really remember it being palpable in the mid to late 90s, and there was a lot of questions around privacy and like what's happening, like we're opening up a lot of information about ourselves. Where is it going? Is it being stored? Is it there forever? Like really, like how do you manage that? And so a lot of people were skeptical. Some people were just like, I'm not going to use the internet. I'm not going to use email. I'm writing letters. There was like a pushback against all of that too. And then what's been so fascinating to me is like, as a faculty member, like different generational mindsets change so much over time, where students were just like putting their lives out there, and why would you not trust like Web 2.0, and it's like we're a big community and we take care of each other, and it was just such a different sensibility than what I had experienced.
Or also it's like, it's okay if I get an iris scan because I get a cappuccino. It's like, so I mean, there's that. It's like I think people constantly hold both ideas in their head, and they just sort of apply it sort of according to their feeling. I mean, it's so interesting. Like, and I think the idea of like that technology is emotional. I think maybe that we want to divorce it and say, oh no, it's just rational, it's just logical. It's like, no, it's emotional from the jump, and I don't think we want to acknowledge that. And so it's no wonder artists got into it, because maybe there's that feeling of like, I can use this tool too to express my emotional state.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just to jump in here, just thinking about the genre of web art or the internet artist or a media artist, that doesn't seem to really fit now as a label, and how much of what we're talking about, this kind of naturalizing of internet ontology, of connectivity and social, how do we distinguish now that these boundaries and labels have kind of melted away and meshed into one space? How do we distinguish like a work of art using technology with, let's say, something that's in the video game space, or in new forms of social media that uses nonlinear narratives, open-ended spaces, playing with temporalities. How do we kind of sort this out, these spaces?
Say that, like, a really interesting thing that happened to me. I remember when YouTube came about and everybody was posting all these videos, and they're being as weird as the experimental video artists were, and it was just like sort of a real marker in time where there's just all this amateur content, and a lot of experimental video was very much approached in this kind of amateur way. And then as I started out, doing things like I can show my work in festivals, I can show it on cable access TV, I can put it on the internet and self-publish and all this stuff. But then as I started to have a conversation with more of a specific group, it ended up being people in experimental journalism, design. I was way closer to design than ever before, and storytelling, and experimenting with new tools, and how you and that was a totally different way of working. It was almost like being in a film world suddenly, being an artist who made everything herself all the time and was just kind of I suddenly stopped losing the ability to do everything by myself. I started to have to rely on other people. I started to have to rely on big, on relationships to companies and things like that in different ways. And in teaching, I do that more and more now too. I'm not really answering your question, but you did send me on this path to kind of think about really big changes that I experience as an artist now, working with technologies and networks and things like that than I did back then.
Yeah, I have really similar things to say, especially when you talk about single channel video, which, I became known for in the art world, where, I saw that at a certain point, the offerings that were on Vine or Snapchat or now TikTok are really kind of, the legacy heir to Wegman or something like that. My own personal understanding of that, my own imaginative understanding of that kind of goes through to me, William Wegman and single channel funny videos really kind of got a new relevance when David Letterman, was doing stupid human tricks on late night television. So this idea of these kind of ironic gag entertainment that, maybe had a serious element to it because of its irony, kind of, went from, it goes from candid camera, doesn't it? There is a kind of there's always a thread of that sort of dips from popular culture, then into, other realms of culture. And then in a funny way, one of the last videos I ever made, was something that I made to go on Vine, because the different technologies and social media really sort of, I felt that deeply challenged the idea of single channel video in an art gallery, that I felt that Vine, actually the apparatus, began to control the content, and that I wanted to pour my content into the apparatus. The apparatus of the art gallery as a container for the content made no sense anymore, and that Vine felt oh, that's the apparatus. It's going to control my content of 6 seconds, and then the loops and the likes kind of got built into the piece. And I put it up on Vine, and I was adding to it, and I thought, this is all I will ever do for the rest of my life. I'll never make a single channel video. They're all going up on Vine. It's the perfect place, people. Until Vine got killed. So, this theme of births and deaths kind of keeps reiterating. But I'm with Kristin that also from a different point of view, just vis-a-vis, how technology has expanded the studio. I run a very small studio of one, but because I can use digital technologies to do my printing and other making, I can kind of farm stuff out through consumer that comes back to me. So the studio kind of gets expanded through just the way that digital technologies have offered increased opportunities for people to produce things cheaply. So, and without a lot of assistance. So I've kind of benefited, it giveth and it taketh away. So, and thus has it ever been.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Makes me think a lot. Oh, go ahead, Howie.
No, go ahead, Andy.
I was just reacting to both of you, thinking a lot about the studio as a place. In reality and offline, of expansive possibilities, but that with the introduction of technology, it starts to become working within limitations and accepting those limitations to push against and to the direct, like, how do I put this? It's like Oulipo, in literature, where like you write a story without vowels or something like that, and that with technology, accepting the format of TikTok, Vine, for instance, that you have 6 seconds. Working within 6 seconds forces a type of different thinking, a type of creativity, a type of logic and editing that you wouldn't have if you had 12 seconds. And so that, in finding that to be your perfect format, you're actually thinking very format specific and how to burst open the format, whether it's augmented reality, which has to be created and continually expanded upon, or single channel video, which in the 90s was expensive to do unless you had a setup at home. So it's still always working within kind of, and Kristin, when you talked about having all your cables, and all the plugs that you had to bring with you to VJ, and those are limitations. And so it's quite interesting to me to think about that in relation to blowing up the parameters of what all these nascent forms are. You still were quite limited by megabytes and bandwidth and program abilities, and even having to work vis-a-vis Sarah, as your primary programmer. So it's quite interesting.
And I'd say, from 1998 to current time, it's still one of the biggest issues is how do I make those file sizes smaller so that they can fit in order to do more, because I want to do more. But I'm really interested in, I grew really interested in both the limitations and then also how these limitations shape how we think, how we move, how our attention span, things like that. Like, we are shaped by the technologies that we use. And so I think that impulse I had was always to I'm going to frame it. I'm putting a frame around it. I'm going to create a theater. I'm going to, and then as a part of the theater, we're going to look at all of these players and all of this infrastructure that was built, and why is it built? And it would just kind of point things. Like my yard sale would do that. People would just be complaining about their phones half the time, and I was trying to facilitate that conversation as a real material for the piece, and it generated that, but it had to be something really familiar, but I'll pass it over to Cheryl.
Well, I just, it's funny because when I've been thinking a lot technology, going back to the word technique, because, any technique you need to be taught, because it's not intuitive, right? Say how to use oil paint or whatever. There's techniques to do it. They're not intuitive. You must be taught. But then every person who dabbles does things provisionally. You learn technique and then you go against technique. So I feel like when artists approach technology, it's a similar. You learn some techniques which are not intuitive and you must be taught, but then at the same time, you're constantly adapting it in a provisional way that is intuitive. So you kind of, get that. It's not really a clash. It's sort of like a call and response. It could maybe more be summed up as both have savoir-faire, how to do it. You're taught how to do it, but then you sort of defy that technique, that technology, by your own provisional understanding or what creates those provisional needs. It could be your anxiety or your emotional concerns about it. And that becomes the how to do, the savoir-faire, that sort of puts them together. And I think that's what's been, for me, whether I'm using something of an old technique like monoprinting, it could be, nothing could be more elemental, but at the same time, it's still a way of transferring and transmitting with glitches. So, I think that's where I think about the technology, but I totally agree about the way that then you get this other term of like the apparatus, the delivery, like how it comes to you, 124 characters or what have it. I mean, there's so much to say. We could go, on for a long time. It's quite a topic.
I just have one more comment before I see Kelly has appeared, and there is a lot of things to cover, but I just wanted to kind of maybe like I guess suture a few things together that stand out to me. When you mentioned Vine as a platform that it's itself dictated partly the type of form that you would upload. I was thinking about how Dia, thinking of it as a platform, that these new commissions that are coming up within the series, what the stakes are within the form and the platform of Dia. So you're inheriting the format and the platform, but the stakes have changed, and how much of it has become a formalism that you follow or break, and how pure the concept of a web art project is, like minimalism or like conceptualism, that you have to follow. That how much of that is dictated by the platform, and I'm curious about the upcoming projects and how people negotiate those the formalisms of the platform.
Jump in. I mean, it's a great question, Howie, and I think that what you were just sharing, Cheryl, is and Kristin both. I mean, I think it's a negotiation and around your own practice, around your own approach. There is this mapping that you can see that you both have traced in terms of the trajectory of your work since these artist web projects. And yet, even though maybe the technology has changed and the evolution of the digital materials have changed, and the things have become better or more refined, or our technology just has expanded, your approach seems to have been consistent since then. So to almost answer your question, Howie, I feel the artists that are working in the medium today are asking very similar questions and really wrestling with what is the current technology and how can I approach it in a way that's genuine and integral to my practice, and is both rooted in technique and intuition. And I can only think of things have become more complicated. There's more questions to be asked because maybe they already made their own website for their practice. How does this differ from that approach of the didactic artist website? Because everyone has now a much greater and complicated and comprehensive relationship with the interface of the internet. Can't forget about that. But I think the questions and the approach, from my experience in working in the series over the last few years and with many artists, is very similar. It's a really questioning of how can I use and approach this technology with my lens and through my own practice and concerns. And that's what we ask them to do as well. And not, it's not to be wowing in technological terms or experimentation. And sure, if it does that, great, but it's more about being integral to their own work and practice and what would be generative for them to explore. I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but maybe we can take a couple questions. I know we're right at 2:00, but if we can wait and see if anybody chimes into the Q&A. If not, this was fantastic. Really,
I
really
really
wonderful.
enjoyed this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for all the time you put into thinking about your practices, Cheryl and Kristin.
Well, that was a pleasure. Oh yeah, it really it was. It came at a nice moment for me too. Just particularly to have to sort of review and go over, and I was really sort of blown away by how tightly I could make that pattern. It actually made me feel really happy because maybe because things just feel so scary now. It felt like, oh, there's actually a thread that I can pull that is gratifying and not horrifying.
Oh my goodness. I really enjoyed seeing your work too, Cheryl. It was super exciting to see that. Thank you.
I feel the same, and I think it's interesting how it's just and it kind of speaks to what Callie's saying about the way artists take it. I mean, we're pretty different artists, but yet at one point in time we were kind of sitting on the same toadstool in terms of early video, and then we've really gone in different directions with the stuff. But I think that's what's important to me is to see how technology can come into the body. And I mean that in a kind of a literal way, how it comes in, how it kind of comes into the body of work, and it kind of it changes it, it morphs it. It's interesting.
The other thing that it had me contemplating, especially with the first part of this program, that preceded us was the idea of how humanism and the internet has been an underlying theme, at least for the 90s, the emo. The relationship to the body part, and with all the discourse about post-humanism and stuff like that, there is a revisiting of that moment where we're considering both things side by side or intersected together.
Well, I liked the phrase so much when in the earlier presentation that Ori did, talking about the early voice of the internet and being able to see this right afterwards. Felt like something where the internet, so much is added per second. There's some statistic I obviously don't know that it's the deepest well that ever existed, and so many platforms are bought or usurped or disappear, and you can only find them through the Wayback Machine, if you can even deal with that, at archive.org. And the internet is this historic place that keeps erasing itself, as technologies do. As one technology doesn't just improve upon the other, it eradicates it. And so, when it comes to, as I mentioned before, early cinema, they say something like 80% of early cinema films before 1950 are gone. And I wonder how much of the internet exists, because it's not a physical thing, it's a virtual thing to me. And in this effort, which clearly is a major effort by DIA over a 25-year span, to already have to retroactively go back and fix itself from Flash HTML5 in the digital world versus the analog world. Preservation or updating is there's no sense of permanence. It's only an update. And in this sense, it's just an emulation. It looks like it acts like the original, but fundamentally, or programmatically, it's different. And so, when will DIA have to do this again? And how many institutions who have had web initiatives, whether they be smaller ones or bigger ones, can maintain the art? And for the artist who's moved on, and at what expense could they even, come from their own pocket to do such things for their own old work? How much does the web and web art rely upon institutions to save it and to keep it online? These are thoughts that come to me.
Such a good question. And yeah, Andy, because that was actually a big part of our thinking over the last few years. We actually even started to reach out to different organizations about starting a consortium around those that had commissioned or are currently still commissioning internet-based work. I hesitate to say born digital because I feel like it's really the internet that's driving these works. So the Walker, for instance, and SF MoMA, Whitney, of course, Rose Golden, all of these organizations we are reaching out to, mainly those in North America, of course, there's many in Europe, to ask these questions, to see how we can approach this as institutions and help artists keep these works accessible. The Walker, for instance, was prolific in the leader in these projects, and nearly all are inaccessible. They let it's just, they haven't conserved them. They sort of treated it differently. They weren't folded into the collection in the same way. And also people weren't ready for thinking through the preservation of how quickly browsers and technology would advance. So to your other question, I hope that the HTML5, Sarah, and I hope that it is at least 5 to 10 years, if not maybe longer, we hope. But we don't know. You don't know. And that control over how things function and work is really the biggest question. Who and how is that, who's making those decisions, and what say do we have to pause and be a part of that control in some way? But these are bigger questions. Well, it looks like we have, I think, quite a shy audience. So thank you all for joining us on your Saturday. And thank you for being a part of this wonderful series. Howie and Andrew for thinking so thoughtfully through the panel and the questions and bringing Cheryl and Kristin together. We really appreciate it.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks
Have a great
Howie
rest of
for
the
inviting
weekend.
me. Thanks Andrew. Thanks Kelly. It's great to be with you all.
Yes, you too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, have a great weekend. Bye.
You too.